Hello and welcome back to a brand new live episode of the Indian Interest. It's been about 2 years since we last did this. So the show resumes today in a brand new, different format. And I'm going to cover a lot of topics today, a lot of issues. This show, I'm sure many of you know, is all about looking at the world's geopolitical activities from an Indian perspective. It's looking at what's happening in the world that impacts India from a strategic, geostrategic, geopolitical perspective. What has happened in the past few days? What is the impact on India? And what could happen going forward? It's a forward looking show. It's not a news show. This is not a news podcast. It's a forward looking podcast. It's about looking forward and seeing what could the coming days, weeks, and months, and possibly years bring for us, especially in India. And please note that this is not a Q&A show. I will not be taking any questions in this show. If you have questions, I will take them in the Ask Abhijit episode that begins immediately after this live stream concludes. This is a live stream. This is not recorded, in case any of you are wondering. So I have a lot of topics to cover. And without further ado, let me begin the presentation. So here we go. So, this is a weekly intelligence briefing. I'm going to cover a lot of topics in this. A lot is happening in the world right now. It's a very volatile situation, and I'm going to give you a comprehensive analysis of geopolitical developments that are in the process of affecting India's strategic interests. And I'm going to give you some predictions, and I'm going to tell you what are the important storylines and ongoing developments that we in India should track. So let's begin with the most impactful developments. So I have a list of four impactful developments over here, but there's more. I think there's around seven or eight. So one is Russia's offer of the Su-57 export version and the confirmation of S-400 delivery. Then there's India-US trade tensions, which are rising despite negotiations. India's emergence as a key technological manufacturing hub, and China's warning to India about the Brahmaputra river issue, and there's more. So let's get into the details. First of all, Russia has offered India the Su-57E fighter jet, the export version, and it has confirmed the delivery of the S-400 remaining systems to India. It will happen by the year 2026, by next year. So Russia says that it's going to offer India a full technology transfer, and India will be able to produce the fighter jets locally, local production options. So these defense overtures, they strengthen the long-standing India-Russia strategic partnership, and it's especially crucial for India, given the current shortage that we have. And apparently, we have had some combat aircraft losses. Apparently, that's what the chief of defense staff seems to have confirmed, right? So it's and we already have a significant shortage of fighter jets. Of fighter jet squadrons, so it's very important we do something about the shortfall that we are seeing. We are doing some stopgap arrangements by becoming very powerful in the field of missiles and drones, but we still do need high quality fighter planes. So securing this advanced Russian military technology will enhance India's capabilities against China, against Pakistan. The Chinese are apparently in the process of giving Pakistan or selling to Pakistan advanced fighter planes, maybe fifth generation fighter planes, right? So this, if it happens, if this happens, if this goes forward, then it's gonna demonstrate India's commitment to being strategically autonomous, and our commitment to balancing the relations with Russia and Western powers, and so on. And despite Western sanctions on Moscow and all that, so the Russians are offering the stealth fighter planes with technology transfer, and I predict that India will accept by the end of this year a modified Su-57E offer. So what they're offering will have to be studied, analyzed, right? We'll have to negotiate that maybe we want something else, we want something different, maybe we want something additional in addition to what they're offering. So we're going to have to sit down on the table. We're going to have to look at this in a very detailed manner, and then we have to make a proposal to the Russians, or maybe a counter proposal, and then the two sides need to find ways to agree. So I believe, so this process takes time. It's not going to happen in the next 30 days, 90 days. It's going to take time. But I think that by the end of this year, India will accept this. So I think this could be a significant boost to the India-Russia strategic partnership. So that's the first big piece of news that we have today, right? Now, what's next? So India and US, there's this trade negotiations that are happening right now. They're in progress, and it is expected that we're going to have an interim deal by the 25th of this month, right? But the trade tensions are rising despite these ongoing negotiations. So the Americans have levied these 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum, and India had sent the US WTO, World Trade Organization, notice, and the US has rejected this notice on technical terms. Now, India obviously probably is considering uh, retaliatory measures, duties, in response to this US rejection. And Donald Trump has been pretty aggressive in the past few weeks concerning India. He is linking this India US trade deal to India Pakistan de escalation. So if you don't de escalate, if you don't maintain the de escalation, and if you take tough measures against Pakistan, then there's no trade that's going to happen, that sort of thing. So navigating this US trade policy under the Trump administration, it presents significant challenges for India. It also presents opportunities for India. So if we have a trade deal, a favorable, mutually beneficial trade deal, it could certainly significantly boost India's exports. Uh, but there is this problem of US protectionism. The Trump regime has been very very stringent about US protectionism, and they want to link trade to security issues like the India Pakistan issue, and this complicates India's economic strategy, and it kind of is an attempt to uh, curtail India's strategic autonomy. And India's firm stance on WTO issues and the potential retaliatory measures which could happen, retaliatory tariffs, this indicates that India could have the willingness to assert its interests despite the overall strategic partnership that we have with the US. So the uh, trade negotiations are advancing, it's going on, and most likely it looks like we're going to have some kind of an interim, not final, but interim trade deal by June 25. But the US, this particular administration is very transactional, and they are focused on a lot of short-term interests, and they kind of have a maximalist position that we are seeing not just vis-a-vis India, but vis-a-vis other nations as well. We saw it vis-a-vis the negotiations they had initially with Russia about the potential ceasefire to the Ukraine war. We are seeing similar maximalist approach vis-a-vis the Iran nuclear deal. So that's the problem India is facing. The US is obviously the supremely powerful nation on the planet, and they feel like they can get away with anything. And that's the problem. So let us see how this goes. So right now, tensions are rising between India and the United States, despite the partnership that we have with them, and despite the ongoing trade negotiations. We have shown willingness that we want to negotiate. We don't want to fight you. Let's sit down, let's talk, let's negotiate, and let's find a good solution that's mutually acceptable. But they are pushing, they're trying to arm twist India and use various kinds of leverage. So that's the issue. That's what's causing this friction and these tensions between India and the US. Next, India has emerged as a key technological manufacturing hub. So in the past year or so, there's been a surge of iPhone exports from India to the US. So India has now surpassed China as the largest iPhone exporter to the US. And this is obviously driven by the US China trade tensions and the differential tariffs and so on. And there is 23,000 crore rupees of semiconductor projects that India is currently, that the Karnataka government has currently approved. So that's a significant piece of news. And 46,000 AI GPUs. That's another big number. So India's preparing to bolster its AI capabilities with 46,000 GPUs, and there's a demand for 1 million AI professionals by 2026. So that's a significant demand. So India is going all in on artificial intelligence, on high technology, right? And this this signifies what we are seeing, or this growing trend, this rising trend. It signifies India's growing success in becoming a global electronics manufacturing hub and a viable alternative to China. And that's what India wants, right? So this boosts the Make in India project. It attracts foreign direct investment, FDI. It creates jobs. It enhances India's role in global tech supply chains. And these semiconductor investments, they align with India's ambition for self-reliance in critical technologies. And it strengthens India's position in the US led friend shoring initiative. So, this is a great development for India. Pretty turbulent time, tensions with the US, but India's emerging has emerged as the biggest iPhone supplier to the US, exporter to the US, and all of this is happening. So, overall, good signs for India. Next, the Chinese. Well, the Chinese have issued a Brahmaputra river warning to India. So China threatens to block the Brahmaputra river's flow into India, India's far east, into the what we call the northeastern part of India, and this is something that follows India's suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty with Pakistan. Now, whether this is lip service for Pakistan to keep Pakistan happy, or do they really intend to do this, remains to be seen. But this definitely introduces a grave water security dimension to the India-China competition, which is an ongoing matter. India-China competition, right? Now, the question is really is: does China have the ability to block the Brahmaputra's river water flow into India? And that's a matter for another discussion. Uh, because about 20% of the water of the Brahmaputra flows from Tibet into India. About 80% is of the water. It actually is collected by the river from within India itself, in the forests of Arunachal Pradesh and various parts of northeastern India. But overall, this is a serious warning that India should take very seriously. This introduces a grave security dimension to India's strategic competition with China. The Chinese are threatening to weaponize the shared river resources. This could directly impact India's far east and northeastern states, their water supply and agriculture. Uh, and this is something I'll discuss at a different point in time, not in today's episode. But this is an escalation by China. And this move by China significantly escalates its involvement in the India Pakistan matter, in the India Pakistan disputes. And this demonstrates China's willingness to use its geographical advantage, the heights of Tibet, its possession, its occupation of Tibet, as leverage against India. So yeah, this is a grave provocation by China. This threat they have issued to India. Uh, India has established a unified military command structure. So this is going to improve inter-services operations. It will bolster India's operational readiness. It will streamline the military decision making. Historically, we have had three services, the tried services, right? The Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and each of them have their own chief. And in the past, there have been issues about the three services not being able to uh, cooperate seamlessly and talk to each other seamlessly, communication issues or whatever it was. So by establishing a unified military command structure, we're going to have joint capabilities, and the objective is to address the two front threat that India faces from China and Pakistan. So this strategic restructuring is a very important critical step in modernizing India's military architecture, and the objective is to effectively address the evolving security challenges that India faces. And it's expected to improve joint operations capabilities and enhance overall military effectiveness. This will streamline decision making. It will enhance India's overall military effectiveness, and this is crucial for India's aspirations, India's the threats that we face, the challenges we face, and our aspirations as a regional and eventually beyond regional power. And this will help us manage effectively complicated security scenarios. So overall, excellent move, very welcome move. Now, the EU and India, uh, we are in the process of having free trade agreement negotiations, and this is currently accelerating. So India's Commerce Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal, he is he has expressed confidence that the India EU free trade agreement could be concluded before the end of this year. And it looks like there is significant progress in the negotiations. Uh, so maybe both sides will make some kind of concessions. Maybe India may make some regulatory concessions. Both sides will have certain requirements, certain demands from the other, and I'm sure the negotiations are going to be intense, and pretty tough. But at the end of the day, you want to find a mutually favorable, mutually beneficial uh, outcome for this, right? And so India may make some regulatory concessions to the EU, and in exchange, India may secure favorable terms for the services sector, and India is working to protect its agricultural interests. So this successful FTA, free trade agreement, whenever it happens with the EU, it would be a major achievement for India's economic diplomacy, diversifying trade relationships, and rising and reducing dependencies on any one bloc, right? Uh, and it would strengthen India's ties with a key global economic power. The EU, I mean, it still is a major global economic power. It's a major global economic bloc. So it would enhance India's integration into global supply chains. It would attract investment from EU nations, and it would provide a counterbalance to China's economic influence in Asia. So this would definitely align with India's strategic autonomy goals and economic goals. So yeah, looks like we are on the right track when it comes to this free trade agreement negotiations with the EU. Next, a US Senator, Richard Blumenthal, has proposed 500% tariffs on Russia's oil partners, on nations that are trading oil with Russia. And he has specifically mentioned India and China. So if this happens, it would severely affect India's energy security, because India has significantly increased discounted Russian oil imports. I think India could probably be the number one destination for Russian oil right now. So once again, this has the effect of putting pressure on India's policy of strategic autonomy and India's balanced relationship with Russia and the West. And this, if this goes forward, then it will force India into a pretty difficult diplomatic and economic balancing act. And this could strain India-US relations if India resists. So this is another attempt to arm twist India and potentially, sanction India in a way. So these are the key important developments. There's more. So India, and this is an interesting one, very important one. India has supplied a second batch of Brahmos missiles to the Philippines. So this bolsters the India-Filipino bilateral defense cooperation. And this comes amid the situation in the South China Sea, in which the Chinese are claiming the entire region as their own, right? So this arms transfer or sale, it solidifies India's role as an emerging defense exporter, right? And a strategic security partner in the Indo-Pacific region. Supplying advanced missiles to a nation like the Philippines, which is in direct dispute with China, it signals India's more assertive stance in the regional security considerations, in the regional security architecture, and it signals India's intent to act as a counterbalance to China and to Chinese influence. So this can be seen as something in line with India's Act East policy and India's defense diplomacy. So very good news for the Philippines, and it's a boost to India's defense, India's standing as a defense exporter, as an emerging defense exporter. And these are pretty potent missiles. So yeah, good for the Philippines. So that's the most important developments thus far in the past week or so. Now let's talk about what could happen the next week to next 3 months. So we're going to discuss a bunch of issues, 5 issues: the India-Pakistan water and border dispute issue, the escalation, the diplomatic crisis. India is sending diplomatic teams. It's significant diplomatic outreach to a lot of countries across the world. It's something that's ongoing, right? So that is something that's going on, and there are border tensions. Obviously, the so-called ceasefire is holding, but it's a tense situation at the India-Pakistan border in the LOC. And there's increased India-China strategic and economic competition. There's accelerated indigenous defense production from the part of India. India is accelerating trade diversification, and India is demonstrating a more assertive regional security posture. So let's discuss these uh, topics and the various scenarios one by one. First of all, we talk about the India Pakistan issue. And the first prediction is that there's going to be an escalation in India Pakistan water dispute and the border LOC tensions. So, 85% sustained diplomatic crisis. That's the scenario. 10% probability of limited de escalation, and 5% probability of military miscalculation. So, these potential scenarios are for the next 30 to 90 days. And let's see scenario A. What is the scenario A like? So, this is a sustained diplomatic crisis and heightened border tensions. And this has a 90% probability in my assessment. And the time horizon is the next month to 2 months. So, India will most likely, in this according to this scenario, which I think is the most likely scenario, so India will most likely maintain its suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty and reduced water flow and erratic water flow from the Chenab River. uh, and obviously we cite Pakistan's continuing support for cross-border terrorism, and Pakistan's espousal of terrorism as a policy of the nation, right? uh, Pakistan will intensify diplomatic efforts to internationalize the issue. And they're going to seek intervention from entities like the World Bank, and they're going to seek intervention from allies like China. And the border will remain tense. Border skirmishes could continue. Military posturing from Pakistan, etc., may continue. But most likely, this will all fall short of full scale conflict. So, what could happen is that there could be increased international scrutiny on India's water policy. And there could be strained relations with China if China overtly supports Pakistan on the water issue. And there could be continued resource drain because of the heightened border militarization, which would affect Pakistan way more than India. And the key assumption behind this is that India believes, and India is right to believe, that it can manage international pressure regarding the Indus Waters Treaty by linking it to terrorism, right? And the other assumption is that Pakistan lacks immediate military options to compel India to restore the water flow. And one more assumption is that international bodies will be hesitant to take any kind of punitive action against India, given India's economic and strategic importance. So this is the most likely scenario. 90% probability in my assessment that this situation will will be sustained, and India will continue to maintain its suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty. This is scenario A. What is scenario B? So scenario B is a low probability scenario, 5% probability, which this scenario is that there could be limited de-escalation with conditions imposed on Pakistan. This is a very unlikely scenario, just 5% probability. So what could happen is that India could agree. Hmm? India could agree to partially restore water flow to Pakistan under international pressure. Hmm? And Pakistan then would be required to take verifiable steps against specific terror groups. And there could be potential for a partial revival of back channel, not official, but back channel diplomatic talks. And important global actors like the United States, the Trump administration, of course, Trump would be happy to do this, and the World Bank would actively mediate in this matter. So if this happens, then India will be seen to be responsive to international concerns about the humanitarian effect of this on Pakistan, on the poor, innocent Pakistani people. And so India would be seen as being responsive to these concerns, while also at the same time maintaining leverage over Pakistan, and that sort of thing. Uh, so the assumption is that the Trump administration will try and interfere again, and it will perhaps rope in the World Bank to mediate. Another assumption is that Pakistan is willing and able to make some counter-terrorism concessions, which is that's why I say it's a 5% probability thing. And another assumption is that for the scenario is that India sees some kind of tactical advantage in a temporary de-escalation to focus on other strategic fronts. So I think this is a highly unlikely scenario, but for the sake of a fully 360-degree approach, well-rounded approach, I have put this scenario out there so that we can study various aspects of this situation. Very unlikely that this happens. India, in my opinion, will never agree to something like this, and this requires that Pakistan takes verifiable steps against specific terror groups, which is impossible. Pakistan won't do that. Those are Pakistan's most valuable assets. That's why Pakistan is valuable to nations like the US and China. Why would they divest themselves of this strategic leverage that they have? That's scenario B. What is scenario C? Scenario C also has a 5% probability, and all these scenarios they play out over 30 to 60 to 90 days. Right? Scenario C is a military miscalculation that leads to renewed conflict. This has a 5% probability at this point in time, in my assessment. So, what could happen according to this unlikely scenario? First of all, there's an escalation in the water crisis. The water crisis in Pakistan leads to domestic unrest. And Pakistan becomes desperate. The Pakistani military becomes desperate, and they take some kind of desperate, ill-advised military action. Maybe they decide to target Indian water infrastructure, or maybe they conduct some kind of border incursion. And if this happens, if they do such a thing, such an ill-advised thing, then India retaliates. India retaliates swiftly and decisively, and India significantly degrades Pakistani military assets and capabilities within a time period of 24 to 72 hours, right? And then there's what ensues is an international crisis. The United States, the Trump administration steps in and pressurizes India to step back and once again let Pakistan off the hook. And China issues threats and warnings, and then the specter of a two-front war looms in front of India. If China decides to step in which case things could significantly and very rapidly blow out of control, because then India will want to fight only one war at a time, not two fronts, which means India has to end the Pakistan threat once and for all. So that's something the world doesn't want, especially the Trump administration doesn't want. So, in my opinion, this is a highly unlikely scenario at this point in time. Pakistan, we know that they are not a rational nation, but I don't think whatever happens, they will do this. Look, if there is a water crisis in Pakistan and the people are suffering, it's not like the military of Pakistan cares. They have never cared about the people. So I think this is a highly unlikely scenario. The most likely scenario is that is scenario A that we just discussed. So that's about the India-Pakistan issue, which is the first topic with predictive scenarios. What's topic number 2? Topic number 2 is the India-China strategic and economic competition, not cooperation. So I predict, what are the percentages that we have? So there's a 70% probability of scenario A, which is diplomatic and economic pressure. There's a 25% probability of scenario B, economic retaliation and border incidents. And scenario C is military escalation with a 5% probability. Let's study these scenarios. What is scenario A? Let's look at it in detail. So scenario A is a heightened diplomatic and economic pressure with border stability. So the border remains stable. The the India-Tibet mostly undemarcated border remains reasonably stable. No major incident. Both nations stick to what was agreed upon the past year or so, but there is heightened diplomatic and economic pressure that both nations apply on each other. So India has, taken this action vis-a-vis Pakistan, the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, and according to this scenario, China could respond by increasing diplomatic support for Pakistan. Stronger war of words comes from China regarding the Brahmaputra, which they've already started kind of, and the Chinese could impose targeted export controls on critical minerals that could affect Indian industries. And what could India do in response to this? India will have to accelerate friend shoring initiatives which means relocating supply chains to friendly nations, allied nations, nations with similar geopolitical interests and similar ideological bent, and so on, right? So India could accelerate friend-shoring initiatives with Australia for critical minerals. And Apple is a big component now of India's manufacturing shift. So that could be strengthened and bolstered. And India could strengthen its security ties with the Quad and ASEAN nations. And India would, at the same time, want to manage border tensions with China through the existing agreed upon mechanism. So what's the potential geopolitical impact of this on India? So there could be increased costs for certain Indian industries. There could be a need for an increased accelerated diversification of supply chains from India's part. And this would necessitate a stronger alignment with Western partners and Quad partners. And this will significantly complicate the strategic environment in the Indian subcontinent region. So this is scenario A. There's going to be border stability with China, but there's going to be heightened tensions, economic and diplomatic tensions between India and China. And China has already started issuing threats about the Brahmaputra River. So this has a 70% probability. This is the most likely scenario. Next month and a half to next 3 months, this is what could most likely happen. What is scenario B? Scenario B is a slightly nastier scenario. This has a 25% probability, and the time horizon is the next 2 to 3 months. So scenario B is targeted economic retaliation, which could be initiated by China, and there could be minor border incidents. So according to this scenario, what happens? China could impose significant economic restrictions on Indian goods or investments in various specific sectors. And then you could also have minor localized military standoffs or increased air activity or maybe naval activity. So air activity along the LAC with China, the India-Tibet LAC, or there could be naval activity, increased naval provocations perhaps from the Chinese Navy in the Indian Ocean region. And the objective from China's perspective will to signal displeasure against India and to pressurize India without triggering a major escalation. And India will reciprocate with its own targeted economic measures. So, what's the potential geopolitical impact on India? This could cause disruption to specific Indian economic sectors, obviously, the ones that China tries to target. This will necessitate increased defense expenditure for India. And this will heighten domestic pressure internally in India for a stronger response to China. So this could bring the government under pressure, and China would be very pleased if that happens. So this is scenario B. So what should we watch out for, which would indicate this scenario is happening? So Chinese tariffs against India, or maybe some other kind of non-tariff barriers on Indian exports to China. Secondly, increased PLA border patrols or infrastructure development in along the disputed, undemarcated line of actual control, right? That could happen. And then India could take countermeasures. Maybe India could block or ban more Chinese apps, and India could block Chinese investments, and so on and so forth. So this is scenario B. This has a significant probability, 25%, right? So this is a non-insignificant scenario. This could actually happen in the next 2 to 3 months, roughly. What is scenario C? Scenario C has a 5% probability. This is a highly unlikely scenario. This also has a time horizon of about a month to 3 months. And this is a significant military escalation, which could cause a regional destabilization, right? So, in this scenario, maybe a miscalculation of some kind during a border standoff could happen, or maybe there could be a severe Chinese economic blockade on India, and this could lead potentially to a larger military conflict. Or maybe China actively intervenes militarily or provides substantial direct support to Pakistan in Pakistan's ongoing issues with India. And this could lead to a two-front kind of situation, two-front war kind of crisis for India. So India would then simultaneously face security challenges on both the borders, the western border and the northern border. And the potential geopolitical impact on India is that this is a major security crisis. It could cause significant economic disruption. It has the potential for a much larger, much wider regional war, which could draw in other major powers. And this would be a severe test of India's alliances or quasi alliances. How good are our friends? Right? Is the US genuinely a security partner for India? I mean, the entire point of of the India-US relationship is for both sides the China factor, isn't it? So that's the deal. So this is scenario C. I think it has a very low probability, about 5%, but overall that makes up the full 100%. So that's the scenarios concerning the India-China situation. Now, next we discuss India's accelerated indigenous defense production, and this is a very bright spot for India. So, following the recent conflicts that we had with Pakistan, and we have had these high level calls for self reliance. I believe that India will announce a comprehensive defense production acceleration program. And this will focus on projects like the AMCA, the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, various variants of the Brahmos supersonic cruise missile, and advanced drone systems. So let's examine the scenarios. What is scenario A in this case? So scenario A says that there will be major policy announcements and increased funding. Um, in my assessment, this has an 80% likelihood of this scenario occurring in the next month to 2 months. So there could be significant new funding for indigenous defense projects. Our Make in India uh, initiative has really borne fruit. We could see how good our indigenous weapons are. We could see that in the three day war with Pakistan. We completely rendered Pakistan helpless. That's how good our systems were. And you could have so there could be a significant funding boost for these indigenous defense projects, and there could be new public-private partnerships in the defense sector. So um, there is a strong political will to prioritize defense self-reliance, Atmanirbharta, post the Pakistan conflict. And there is sufficient funding for sufficient fiscal space, like they say, for increased defense research and development and manufacturing uh, investment. So, what's the potential geopolitical impact on India? This could give us enhanced long term defense capabilities. It will significantly reduce import dependency, which is a huge Achilles heel that India has had. It will give India a much stronger deterrence posture, and this will definitely position India as a regional and significantly, I mean, increasingly important defense exporter. So, I make this prediction assuming that there is a strong political will to prioritize defense self-reliance, right? And one also has to assume that the various bureaucratic hurdles that exist in defense procurements, they could be overcome or at least partially overcome, right? And of course, I'm assuming that there is sufficient funding, sufficient fiscal space that exists for increased expenditure in defense R&D and manufacturing investments. So I think there could be some kind of announcement or multiple announcements of this kind in the next maybe month to 2 months. 80% probability in my assessment. That's scenario A. Scenario B is that there could be selective fast tracking of certain projects with strategic which are very significantly strategically important. So I think this has a probability of 15% in the next 2 to 3 months. So what you could have is that India could fast track a few high visibility and high importance projects, indigenous projects. For example, the AMCA prototype, the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft prototype, specific missile systems. But apart from this, India in this scenario probably continues a significant reliance on strategic imports for immediate capability gaps. There are certain problems that we need to fix immediately. Developing a new fighter plane takes about a decade. Right? I mean, even if it's already on the drawing board and progress has already happened, but still it'll take 5 to 7 to 10 years for the AMCA to become fully operational and the first fighter planes to be inducted. But in the meanwhile, what do? We have a significant shortfall of fighter plane squadrons. Right? So what do we do in that case? So in that case, we're gonna have to rely significantly on strategic imports for immediate capability gaps. So, for example, we may have to perhaps go and procure the Sukhoi 57E. Like I said, I think there's a significant probability, 80% probability, that India may agree uh, to the Russian offer by the end of this year. So the Sukhoi 57, I think it could happen, right? And we may also need critical subsystems for various domestic platforms and so on. So this is a 15% probability scenario. I think even in the first scenario with 80% or so probability, uh, the Sukhoi 57 thing may actually still happen. So what's the geopolitical impact of this scenario on India? So there could be mixed progress in this scenario on self-reliance. And in this scenario, there will be continued vulnerability to import disruptions. Exporters could use the fact that they're exporting critical things to us as leverage. So that could be an issue. And there will be faster modernization in specific areas through foreign partnerships, as per this scenario. So the key assumption is that immediate security threats will necessitate rapid acquisition of proven foreign systems from reliable suppliers, reliable partners. Maybe Russia is the most reliable one. Maybe France also could be reliable, right? And the fact is that we are constrained by the fact that indigenous development timelines of complex systems remain lengthy, remain protracted, right? Um, and we also want to balance our strategic autonomy with maintaining diverse defense partnerships with key partners. So all of this taken together would kind of lead us to scenario B, or some kind of hybrid scenario A, scenario B kind of situation. So this is scenario B, 15% probability. Scenario C is very unlikely in my opinion, but let's consider it anyway to see what's the worst case scenario and the most unlikely scenario. So this has a time horizon of 6 months or so, and a very small 5% probability. And this scenario says that indigenous drive to manufacture weapon systems within India stalls because of a variety of challenges. So initially there could be announcements, but despite these initial announcements, major indigenous projects could face significant delays, or they could face funding cuts because of economic pressures or unforeseen technological challenges. And because of this, India could be forced to make emergency procurements from foreign sources at less favorable terms. So this happens if there is economic pressure. Maybe there are worsening economic conditions for whatever reason. Maybe India's GDP per capita, India GDP growth suddenly for some reason isn't great. That could, throw a wrench in throw a spanner in the works, so to say. Um, there could be supply chain issues, maybe some kind of international sanctions. Maybe Donald Trump is not happy with our cooperation with Russia, so he sanctions us in some way. That could also happen. Anything's possible in the world. Or some kind of other disruption could impact key imported components. So what's the geopolitical impact potentially of this sort of scenario on India? So this would result in a weakened deterrence posture, increased vulnerability to foreign threats, to immediate regional threats for India. And this could damage the credibility of Make in India. And this would cause greater dependence, greater reliance on foreign powers. Now, the key assumptions for this scenario is that for some reason, economic conditions worsen significantly, and this would obviously impact the defense budget. And another assumption could be that critical technological breakthroughs for indigenous projects do not materialize. And maybe another assumption could be that there could be some kind of international sanctions, or if there are not sanctions, then there could be supply chain disruptions of some kind, which could impact vital or key important components for domestic production. So this is a highly unlikely scenario. I think scenarios A and B, or maybe a hybrid of scenario A and B, are way more likely. But overall, this is how I see it. So overall, I think that there's going to be a significant boost in India's indigenous defense production in the next month to 3 months, and we could see announcements happening in that kind of time period. Now, Fourth prediction: India accelerates trade diversification. So you cannot depend on any one partner. You have to diversify your portfolio of trading partners. So we discussed the EU partnership some time ago. There is significant progress on FTA negotiations, free trade agreement negotiations with the EU. There is a limited trade framework with the US that is currently taking shape right now. There are tensions and friction with the US, and major tech companies, I believe, will announce expanded manufacturing investments in India. So let's take a look at the various scenarios. The first scenario, the most likely scenario with a 75% probability in the next 2 to 3 months, is that there will be significant progress on various free trade agreements and investments. So India makes notable progress on free trade agreement negotiations with the European Union and a limited trade framework with the United States. Um, and because of this, because major tech companies will be attracted by PLI schemes and a significantly diversifying global manufacturing landscape, because of that, major tech exporters who already have the example of Apple to follow, they will announce expanded manufacturing investments in India, particularly in electronics and semiconductors. So this will have the economic impact of strengthened economic ties with Western partners and reduced dependence on China. So this is scenario A. I think it's the most likely scenario. I think things are looking good, and this has a time horizon of 2 to 3 months. What's the potential geopolitical impact on India? So we're going to have strengthened ties, economic ties with various Western nations, EU nations, with the US as well, potentially. And there's going to be a boost in domestic manufacturing. There's going to be a boost in job production in India. And there's going to be an enhanced role for India to play in global technological value chains. So I'm assuming that there is significant political will in India, in the EU, and in the US to conclude these various trade agreements. I assume that this political will remains high. And one assumes that India offers sufficient market access and regulatory reforms to attract investment. So it's key for India to uh, do these reforms, to implement regulatory reforms which make investment in India more attractive. And obviously, the world has to continue to see India as a viable alternative to China for manufacturing, which is why these reforms are uh, very important for India to implement. So, this is scenario A. It's a very positive looking scenario. I think there's going to be a significant progress on these matters in the next 2 to 3 months, 75% probability. Scenario B: in this scenario, there's mixed progress on FTAs and moderate investment. And this has a 20% probability, which is not very insignificant. 20% is still sizable. And this has a time horizon of about 3 months. So, according to this scenario, negotiations with the EU and the US see some progress, but they face significant roadblocks on contentious issues like agriculture and data localization. India insists that all data should be localized within India. In data of Indian users should be localized within India, but other nations, our negotiating partners may see things differently. So this could be a contentious issue, and there could be other issues like these. Agriculture is another one. So there could be roadblocks in these cases, right? And because of this, and another possibility is that various Western companies may possibly adopt a more cautious China plus one approach rather than an rather than a China exit strategy involving India. So they'll continue to stay in China, but also invest to some extent in India and manufacture to some extent in India. So it's a China plus one kind of policy rather than a China exit strategy. Um, so the key assumptions in this is that contentious issues in the free trade agreements prove, for whatever reason, difficult to resolve quickly. And global economic uncertainty makes companies hesitant about large scale relocations. Large scale relocations are always a pain, they're very difficult. And it's natural for any company to be hesitant to make a large scale relocation, especially when you already have a very good setup in China. Why uproot that and relocate it to India, which is maybe a nation that they're not so familiar with. So that could possibly make companies hesitant to do that. And another assumption is that in this scenario is that India's domestic market reforms are insufficient to fully attract the desired foreign direct investment. So if we don't want this scenario to come to pass, it means that we will need to enact significant domestic market reforms, which will which will make India a very attractive destination for foreign direct investment. So if this scenario happens, what's the geopolitical impact on India? The impact is that there will be slower economic integration with the West. There will be slower economic growth in India. There will be continued moderate reliance on China, right? And there'll be partial success in attracting manufacturing that wants to move away from China. So this is scenario B, 20% probability, roughly 3-month horizon. Scenario C is a bad scenario. This is a 5% probability. It's a highly unlikely scenario. But according to this scenario, in this scenario, trade tensions escalate, most likely with the US, and other nations that are led by the US could follow suit, right? And the friend shoring initiative falters. So this is a 5% probability in the next 2 to 3 months. So in this scenario, the US imposes significant new tariffs on Indian goods and Indian products. And then India retaliates. India implements retaliatory measures, maybe tariffs on US goods, and makes it more difficult for US companies to sell to the Indian market. And these actions and retaliations, there could be a breakdown in talks in trade negotiations, and this is not a very good scenario. And this scenario assumes that US trade policy becomes more protectionist and less predictable, and that's kind of the direction in which the Trump administration is going. Uh, and The assumption also is that India will be unwilling or unable to meet possibly maximalist US demands. The Trump administration has demonstrated this tendency to expect maximalist concessions, to demand maximalist concessions, right? So India may be unable or unwilling to meet these maximalist demands. And so that could give rise to scenario C, which I think is a pretty low probability scenario. What could be the potential geopolitical impact on India if scenario C comes to pass? We will have strained relations with the US. There's going to be increased economic vulnerability, and there's going to be a failure to capitalize on the global supply chain realignment and repositioning out of China. So this is a highly unlikely scenario, but we should always discuss the worst case scenario in any such predictive discussion. So that is scenario C. Now, what's the next topic? The fifth prediction. The fifth prediction is that India will adopt a more assertive regional security posture. What are the probabilities? So scenario A is 75%, scenario B is 20%, and scenario C is 5%. Let's examine these scenarios one by one. Scenario A is that India will have strengthened security ties with the Quad nations and Western nations. This has a 75% probability with a time horizon of 2 to 3 months. And you could see something happen in the next 2 to 3 months. So, what's the description of the scenario? So, India deepens military cooperation with the Quad nations. The Quad nations are India, the US, Japan, and Australia. So, India deepens military cooperation with the Quad nations through joint exercises and potentially technology sharing. India expands cooperation with other Western part naval exercises and US defense agreements. And India could go on a diplomatic offensive. I think India is already doing that, so this is part of that. And India intensifies diplomatic efforts to isolate Pakistan on the issue of terrorism through FATF action and engaging new partners, which India is actively already doing right now. And India pursues a policy of strategic disengagement with Pakistan, something I discussed yesterday, while maintaining absolute military readiness to deal with any kind of eventuality which comes from Pakistani actions, right? So what are the key assumptions behind this scenario? The key assumption, first of all, is that there is shared concerns among the Quad nations, India, Western nations, the US, etc., about China's assertiveness. And this is what continues to drive the cooperation among the Quad nations. Another assumption is that India is committed to its strategic disengagement pocket policy with Pakistan, and that India can successfully leverage its growing diplomatic clout to garner support against Pakistani terrorism. So these are the assumptions. And what's the potential geopolitical impact of this on India, of scenario A? So we're going to have enhanced regional security influence. India will have enhanced security influence, military influence in the region. There's going to be stronger deterrence against China and Pakistan. India will have an improved international standing on counter-terrorism. But there's a risk that India could also get drawn into bigger problems, great power rivalries, in the US China rivalry, and the US may also try to disengage India from its relationship with Russia. So that's a risk, right? So there are benefits and there are risks. So this is scenario A. I think this is the most likely scenario. I think this is the direction in which India needs to go while maintaining our excellent relationship with Russia. So this is scenario A. What is scenario B in this case? Scenario B is a cautious balancing act with a regional focus. A regional focus. This has a 20% probability in the next 2 to 3 months. So, in this scenario, India prioritizes consolidating its influence in the Indian Ocean region and its immediate neighborhood, and India engages selectively with other security frameworks, with like the Quad, selectively, issue-based cooperation, issue-based engagement, not broad engagement and broad cooperation. So, and so India will obviously focus on counter-terrorism operations, which are coming from direct threats from Pakistan, and there could be potentially less emphasis on global coalition building and consensus building against Pakistan. So this is kind of a cautious balancing act, and this has a probability of 20% next 2 to 3 months. And what are the assumptions behind this scenario? I mean, why would India choose to take scenario B over scenario A? So maybe India perceives, for whatever reason, that the immediate threats in the Indian Ocean region, like the Chinese naval presence, etc., are more pressing than distant power projection, right? And India prioritizes maintaining strategic autonomy over deep alignment with the Western Bloc. And maybe for whatever reason, there are resource constraints that limit the scope of India's global security engagement. So the potential geopolitical impact on India, is that you could have missed opportunities for broader global governance, and India may, in this scenario, risk getting outmaneuvered by China in regions like Africa and also other parts of Asia. So this is scenario B, but it will give India stronger immediate regional security. So if we go for this scenario, this has a 20% probability. Scenario C is a rather unlikely scenario, very unlikely, 5% probability in the next 2 to 3 months. And this scenario is that India turns inward because of domestic issues, uh, or maybe a renewed conflict with Pakistan. So maybe there are major domestic challenges, maybe some kind of economic crisis, maybe a political crisis of some kind. Maybe maybe somebody from outside India engineers some kind of social unrest. It's not difficult to do that in India, where you have 100 million illegal immigrants squatting on Indian territory. So it's possible. It can be done. So something like this could happen. Or maybe there's a significant military escalation with Pakistan. And maybe this forces India to reduce its regional and global security engagement, and India will then focus resources and attention inward. So India becomes inward looking, right? So the assumption is that for some reason, internal security and stability becomes overwhelming. You know, becomes an overwhelming issue. Or maybe the India-Pakistan conflict escalates beyond manageable levels. Maybe China significantly helps Pakistan and supplies Pakistan with maybe higher grade weaponry than before, or maybe China gets involved directly. So then it could become a problem for India. And maybe international partners are unable or unwilling to provide sufficient support in that case. So in this case, India could have to turn inward and disengage from broader um engagement with a global outreach. So this has a very small probability of happening. It's a very unlikely scenario. The impact, if this happens, is that there will be diminished regional influence. India will have diminished regional influence. India's alliances will weaken, and there is going to be a much higher potential for India's adversaries to exploit India's preoccupation with internal problems, which is why it is so important for India to manage whatever issues exist internally. This is a very high, a very low probability scenario, but it is something that we have to be very careful about. Right, that is about the predictions. Now let's talk about what's happening that we need to keep an eye on in the coming week. What are the top five storylines that India needs to track in the coming week? So that's the India-Pakistan situation, which is always gonna be something India has to keep an eye on. There is defense modernization and indigenous capabilities. There's the US-China tech war and its impact on India. India's navigation of shifting global alliances, and China's military assertiveness in the South China Sea and the Taiwan situation. So let's take a look at the first one. So we know what's happened thus far. The past 3 4 weeks or so, India and Pakistan had a 3-day war, a significant military confrontation. India pounded Pakistan. This happened because of China of Pakistan's terrorist activities. Uh, and Pakistan was significantly pounded by India, and the US saved Pakistan. And India announced the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, and because of that, there's going to be problems in Pakistan. Crops will fail, and so on. And Pakistan deserves it because they are a terrorist nation, right? And then India has launched a diplomatic campaign, which is ongoing currently as of today. The objective is to isolate Pakistan on the issue of terrorism, on the issue of its state support for terrorism. And Pakistan is also intensifying its outreach to international organizations and its allies, particularly China. So I think Pakistan will intensify its diplomatic outreach to its allies like China and so on, and it will also try to potentially explore military operations to secure water access. If India doesn't give it what it wants, the resumption of the Indus Waters Treaty, and obviously India. So this is an evolving situation. We're going to have to see how Pakistan deals with this crisis that it has created. Right? What's its response going to be like? Will they take some stupid action and maybe try to target some Indian dams or something? We'll have to see about that. So this is an ongoing situation that we have to keep our eye on. The next ongoing situation is India's defense modernization and indigenous uh, defense capability. So we are accelerating our defense modernization in response to the heightened regional security threats from Pakistan as well as China. So we are boosting our defense preparedness. We are focusing on indigenous production of various defense systems, of various military systems, the AMC fighter jet, Brahmos missiles, various other kinds of missiles, drones as well. We have strategically acquired the S-400 system. More deliveries will happen, and they'll be concluded by the end of next year. There is this offer of the Sukhoi 57 fifth generation stealth fighter jet from Russia on the table, right? There is military restructuring that India has done. There's a unified command now, and India has adopted uh, various new warfare doctrines. Drone warfare is very much part of the game now. Uh, so this is something that is an ongoing situation. This is a very rapidly evolving thing, and we have to keep an eye on this. There's this push for indigenous systems, and so I think India is going to accept some version of the Sukhoi 57E proposal from Russia, probably by the end of this year. So we're going to have to balance technology transfer from Russia with continued Western defense acquisitions, right? That's how you maintain strategic autonomy. You don't go fully into one camp. You balance things out. Um, so that's most likely what is going to happen. So we have to keep an eye on this. This is a very important matter for India's security. Uh, Now, the next thing we have to keep an eye on in this week is that the US China tech war is escalating, and this is creating opportunities for India. So, the US has escalated, it has intensified its tech war with China by imposing stringent export controls on advanced AI chips, electronic design automation, EDA software, and jet engine technology that has AI uh, components, right? And China obviously has retaliated with rare earth export restrictions. China is the exporter of 95% of the rare earth minerals, and this is creating supply chain risks and diversification opportunities for India. So India's response is boosting AI initiatives with 46,000 GPUs, approving new semiconductor projects in Karnataka, attracting manufacturing. Apple is increasing its iPhone exports from India. Maybe other things will also happen. And India is seeking critical mineral partnerships with Australia. So there are opportunities for India over here. I think China will most likely accelerate its domestic semiconductor development initiatives, and it will implement targeted retaliatory measures against US technology companies. It's going to happen. It's an ongoing situation, so it's happening every day. So there's going to be new developments in this week, and the US and its allies will then accelerate efforts to develop alternative supply chains for critical minerals. India will most likely in the coming days announce new incentives for electronics manufacturing, and India will is in the process of actively seeking new critical minerals partnerships. The Australia thing is already happening. So this is an ongoing situation, and this has a direct impact on India's technological sector, manufacturing sector, and defense sector. So this is something we have to keep an eye on in this coming week, and maybe much longer than that. Maybe the rest of this year, actually. Next, we have India navigating the shifting realignment of global alliances. This is a rapidly realigning world. Um, you know, things that usually take decades to pass are happening in a matter of weeks right now. So, India needs to maintain its strategic autonomy. India is navigating multiple partnerships. It's engaging with the US, it's engaging with Russia, it's engaging with the EU, it's engaging with the global south. All of this is happening simultaneously. India's influence is expanding, India's diplomatic footprint is growing globally. So, India is doing its best to maintain its independence, its autonomy, strategic autonomy in the current multipolar world order. We are engaging with multiple global powers, we are pursuing trade deals, we are strengthening security partnerships, um, and so on and so forth. Um, so India is deftly managing these complex relationships in the current multipolar world. Um, and so we know that India will most likely conclude a limited trade agreement with the European Union within the next few months, maybe possibly by the end of this year, or maybe 12 months at most. And there's going to be significant progress, most likely, hopefully, with the US also, hopefully, and so on. So this is something that is ongoing. The trade negotiations are going on simultaneously. The diplomatic outreach is progressing as we speak, and the security alliances are being reshaped as we speak. And we're looking at technological alliances, we're looking at rare earth minerals, and so much more. So we are no longer a non-aligned nation, we are a multi-aligned nation, right? So that is the situation. This is another ongoing scenario we have to keep an eye on. What are the things we should watch for? So one thing we have to watch for is what is the American reaction to India's continued engagement with the Russia. S-400 is going to be delivered. Even more of those are going to be delivered to India. Our continuing oil exports from Russia, right? All of that needs to be seen. Potentially, if we accept the Russian offer for the Sukhoi 57E, then what's the US reaction to that? So that's something we have to watch for. Uh, we have to watch for breakthroughs or breakdowns in the India US trade negotiations or the India EU trade negotiations. We have to watch for potential major joint military exercises within the Quad framework, or maybe technology sharing agreements within the Quad framework, or maybe with Russia, right? And we have to look at India's stance on the potential revival of the RIC trilateral, the Russia, India, China trilateral, which is very unlikely, but we have to keep an eye on this. So all of this comes within this particular topic, India navigating the shifting global alliances. It's a very complex situation, rapidly changing situation, and this is something we most definitely have to keep our eye on. And then there is the situation in the Indo-Pacific region, like they say, right? China's growing military assertiveness, which is reshaping the Indo-Pacific. The Chinese have created a new normal with the pressure they are continuously applying on Taiwan. China is escalating military pressure on China, and the PLA operations are now called rehearsals for invasion. And there's apparently a target date of the year 2027, which has been given to the PLA by President Xi Jinping, right? And China is deploying aircraft carriers and warships and bombers in contested waters, right? And this is prompting a counter coalition formation. A new coalition has emerged: the US, Australia, Japan, and the Philippines, right? And there's increased defense spending by American allies like Japan and Australia. Uh, so there's a lot of reshaping of the order in this region. So I think that the US and its allies like Japan, Australia, Philippines, etc., will announce soon enhanced defense agreements and potentially increased joint military exercises in the broader Indo-Pacific region, the larger Indo-Pacific region, in the coming months. And China will respond with even more intense military exercises around Taiwan, surrounding Taiwan, and also the South China Sea. And when this happens simultaneously, there is always the risk of miscalculation. Now, what does this have to do with India? It has everything to do with India, because India has partners in the region. Japan is a partner. We are providing the Brahmos supersonic cruise missile to the Philippines. We have a great relationship with Vietnam, with all the ASEAN nations. And we also have a reasonably tacit good understanding with Taiwan as well, with Indonesia. So it's so it's something that is very much part of a region. It's a region that we are very much interested in, and there have been crises in this region before, and more could happen uh, in the coming days and months. So this is something we have to keep our eye on, and this definitely affects India very much. Now, let's talk about some soft signals. Soft signals are subtle indicators that may signal important emerging trends. They are not making headlines today. These are kind of buried in the deep in the news, but these things could end up impacting India's strategic environment in the coming months. So it always starts with a small thing, and then it snowballs into something much larger. So what's the first soft signal, so to say? So the Bangladesh military junta regime has issued a warning to India over deportations of illegal Bangladeshi infiltrators. It's an unusual warning, right? And this signals that there are tensions between India and Bangladesh. And this could impact the bilateral ties, which are already strained. This could impact regional stability in east of India. And this will necessitate maybe careful uh, diplomatic management of the issue with India, because this threatens border stability. Um, this is generally something that you address diplomatically, but the Bangladesh government is a military regime. It's a military dictatorship. Mohammed Yunus is just the puppet figurehead. The real people in charge are the Bangladeshi military. That's why it's a Bangladeshi military junta regime, and they are upset with India deporting illegal infiltrators back into Bangladesh. uh, so this could militarize the India-Bangladesh border. And this could obviously be a setback for India's neighborhood first policy. And this could also have a spillover effect in India's far east, in regions like Manipur, Mizoram, etc. There's already this American Project K, Cookie Land for Christ, that's ongoing, and I'm not sure if the Trump regime has put a lid on that. So this is a issue that India needs to uh, handle carefully. So this is something that could be bigger in the coming months, because India needs to deport probably around 100 million illegal infiltrators out of India back into Bangladesh. We seem to be just beginning the process. So at the very beginning, the Bangladeshis are kind of warning India, don't send our illegal infiltrators back into our country. So we're gonna have to deal with this, and we can't just accept these threats. So this is something that could be bigger in the coming days, weeks, and months. So let's keep an eye on this, shall we? What's the next soft signal? So India's economic nationalism against Chinese imports. Uh, so Prime Minister Modi criticized or mocked China's small-eyed Ganesh idols, which we could call as culturally charged language. So this signals that India's stance against China is hardening. India's economic stance against China is hardening, and we are bolstering our Make in India initiative. Um, this indicates a strategy of to rally domestic support for reducing our trade dependence on China. Right now, there's a lot of stuff that China is dumping into India, low quality, low priced goods, and so on. So, this may be a strategy to rally domestic support within India, to reduce our trade dependence on China by linking this trade to cultural identity and national pride. So, this could lead to more protectionist measures, so to say, against Chinese goods, which is necessary. And this will obviously further complicate an already strained bilateral relationship with China. And this could also potentially impact Indian businesses that are reliant on Chinese components or markets. So maybe we are witnessing the beginning of this disengagement between India and China, also this decoupling between India and China. So this essentially reinforces India's intention to position itself as a viable manufacturing alternative to China. So this could be a soft signal that indicates something really big, that India is now beginning to position itself as a very major, very viable manufacturing alternative to China. This is a signal. We're beginning We're beginning to see the signaling that signals this intention, that India has a very big intention. So this is a very important soft signal, a very small little thing that happened. Prime Minister Modi criticized China's small-eyed Ganesh idols, but maybe it signifies something very big. Next, you have a Western assessment of India's regional influence. So what happened? CFR, Council for Foreign Relations, uh, their analysis suggests that India is losing what they call South Asia to China, to Chinese influence. So this kind of indicates that there is growing concern in the Western policy circles, think tank circles, about China's expanding footprint in India's traditional sphere of influence. This is a prominent think tank, okay, the Council for Foreign Relations. So this may reflect some kind of perception shift in important Western capitals like Washington D.C., Maryland, that could influence their policies in the Indian subcontinent, what they call South Asia, and this could potentially lead to revised diplomatic or engagement or economic engagement strategies towards India and its neighbors. And this obviously highlights the challenge that India faces in maintaining its regional dominance, regional primacy against China's deep pockets, China's economic inroads and diplomatic inroads. And India may have to rethink, possibly recalibrate its neighborhood first policy. Maybe India needs to increase its investment in regional connectivity and development projects. Maybe India needs to seek stronger strategic partnerships like the Quad, maybe something else, to counterbalance Chinese influence uh, effectively. So there could be in the future major Chinese infrastructure or security agreements with maybe a nation like Bangladesh, maybe once again Sri Lanka, maybe Nepal. The Chinese have been wooing Nepal very, very strongly, right? And we have seen historical precedents to this, right? The Chinese Hamban Tota port deal in Sri Lanka, and the Chinese increase in their economic engagement with Nepal after the earthquake that happened in Nepal, and so on. So this is part of this. This affects India, but it's part of the larger U.S.-China competition, strategic competition, playing playing out across various regions. And so this is something that is concerning for India, and this could signal, if the Western think tanks are thinking that India is losing uh, the South Asia, so-called South Asia region to China, it should be a cause of worry for us, and we need to look at this very carefully and understand what they're really trying to convey. So that's a concerning soft signal. Then obviously there's the India Pakistan water diplomacy tensions. Now the soft signal, this is not a small piece of news. This is a very headline making news, but the soft signal here is a small historical detail that has come out. So in 1960, okay, India made a payment to Pakistan under the Indus Waters Treaty. And this historical detail has resurfaced in the context of the current issues that we are facing with Pakistan. India made a payment of $174 million in 1960. $174 million was a gigantic amount of money in 1960. And we not only gave away 80% of the waters of the Indus Basin rivers to Pakistan, we also paid $174 million to Pakistan as a goodwill gesture or something like that. Right? So it's incredible that we did this. So, this demonstrates that India has tried to earn goodwill, the goodwill of Pakistan, and this goodwill has not been reciprocated ever. Right? So this justifies the tougher water policy that we are now adopting. And you can use this piece of news to justify it domestically as well as internationally, to garner support internationally for India's position. We can show this as a piece of evidence. Look, we gave away 80% of the waters. We even paid them $174 million, which was an astronomical sum of money in 1960. And see how Pakistan has reciprocated. So I'm pretty glad that this piece of news has come out. You could see this as a soft signal. I think it's a very big piece of very tiny news. So, right, this 1960 payment, it has come to light. It's a very, very significant piece of history. Okay, and then this is another soft signal, so to say, technological security and surveillance concerns. So, US experts have found unexplained communication equipment in Chinese solar power inverters. And, Chinese equipment always has such problems. And this raises national security concerns. And this can impact India's surveillance industry. And it will require India to push for more trusted technology because, Chinese systems, I'm sure there are lots of Chinese systems in India, surveillance systems and so on and so forth. So if you have these things in India, Chinese-made products, Chinese-made technological products, electronic products, then there's always the potential that China is using that to spy on India. So this strengthens India's case for collaborating with, let's say, Quad partners, maybe other like-minded countries, on what India would consider to be more trusted technology and more resilient supply chains. I have spoken about backdoors in the past. I have spoken about kill switches in the past. Right? So in the future, it will most likely happen that we will discover backdoors or security vulnerabilities in Chinese surveillance equipment that could be developed in sensitive Indian infrastructure. Surveillance cameras, CCTV cameras, and so on and so forth. So, this is a significantly concerning soft signal. So, what are the key takeaways from all of this? So, India faces its most significant military escalation with Pakistan, and this is a doctrinal shift for India. India has now changed its doctrine, the Operation Sindoor doctrine, that any terrorist attack on India is an act of war. India is a beneficiary of the US-China decoupling because of the accelerating supply chain diversification that's happening world over. And the evolving great power dynamics place India at a strategic crossroads that requires immediate policy recalibration. These are some of the key takeaways. There are more India-centric regional patterns like the border security crisis, supply chain shift, great power competition, the Trump administration. What are the strategic interconnections, critical strategic interconnections? First of all, India China competition. There are limited direct bilateral tensions, but significant competition in third country markets and technological domains. So, India and China are not competing directly, the tensions are not direct. There's significant competition in third country markets. That's an interesting piece of insight that you gain when you analyze large quantities of high signal data. Then there's the US India partnership, which is deepening through economic integration and diplomatic coordination on the so-called South Asian crisis management thing. There's India's role in the Quad partnerships, which is strengthening. And all these partnership entries, more than 40 of them, are showing positive trajectories going upwards, right? And we are facing the challenge of building genuine technological capabilities rather than remaining just a manufacturing hub. We have to become not just a manufacturing hub, but we have to develop genuine technological capability. So that's a challenge that we are facing right now. Um, Emerging inflection points. Operation Sindoor represents a paradigm shift in India's approach to Pakistan-based terrorism. Water diplomacy weaponization. We have suspended the Indus Waters Treaty. This is a new dimension to regional cooperation. It may spill over into the Chinese domain as well. Um, Economic decoupling acceleration is happening. U.S. diplomatic engagement and Trump interfering in India-Pakistan matters. Right. That's an inflection point. Let's look at the trajectory analysis of India's geopolitical activities that concern India by strategic domain. So, in the domain of border management, the status is that of active militarization, and the trend is rising urgency, rising volatility. In the domain of defense modernization, the trend is rising, and there is growing Western integration, which could be offset and balanced if India acquires more Russian weapon systems. In the domain of economic integration, the trend is once again rising, and India is the beneficiary of the China plus one policy that most Western companies are now adopting. In the domain of energy security, there are limited developments the past 1 week, so the trend is stable. In the domain of maritime security, there is steady competition, but the trend is stable. This is a snapshot of the past 1 week's data. Cascading effects on Indian strategic interests. The regional influence scenario is that the assertive Pakistan policy enhances deterrence credibility, but opens door for US and Chinese interference. Okay. Strategic autonomy. Deepening US partnerships can gradually constrain India's strategic autonomy and affect our ties with Russia. And that is what the Trump administration very much wants. So, this is something we have to keep our eyes on. Economic growth, supply chain diversification provides immediate benefits, but also creates new dependencies. It's a given that's going to happen. Internal security. So, the military success that we have had against Pakistan will create expectations for similarly assertive approaches elsewhere. Now, if something happens with China, it's a different ball game, but you're going to have expectations. That's something our planners need to keep in mind. What are the strategic assumptions and what's the assessment? What are the assumptions that are being confirmed? Economic decoupling between the US and China benefits India as manufacturing investment is fleeing China. This assumption is being confirmed. The US can be capricious and unreliable as a partner during crisis periods. Assumption confirmed. Military deterrence through precision strikes creates space for diplomacy. Assumption confirmed. What assumptions are being challenged? So the assumption is that India prefers regional stability. India prefers not to escalate such situations. That assumption is being challenged. India is willing to escalate. Another assumption is that strategic autonomy for India is sustainable. That assumption is under pressure because the Americans want us to abandon strategic autonomy and become a US vassal. Okay, and then there are new assumptions that are emerging. First, water resources are becoming strategic tools. Secondly, India can rapidly scale advanced manufacturing. And thirdly, controlled military escalation is becoming an acceptable policy tool for India. What are the strategic recommendations, finally, that I would give to Indian leaders and planners? What are the immediate actions they should take? First of all, develop a comprehensive Pakistan strategy, balancing deterrence with escalation control. Second, accelerate technology acquisition and domestic capability building, very important. Third, establish clear boundaries for our engagement with the US. in the India-US partnership. That's the immediate actions our planners and leaders need to take. What are the medium term actions and priorities? First, build redundant supply chain relationships beyond China plus one strategies. Secondly, strengthen regional partnerships independent of US led or China led frameworks, entirely independent of these two big nations. Maybe engage with the global south, maybe engage with other nations independent of US and China involvement. Thirdly, develop robust multi-dimensional deterrence against the potential Chinese threat, which is clear and present. And it's there, it's not going anywhere, right? And what's the long term framework that we need to have? We need to position, first of all, India as a technology leader in addition to positioning India as a manufacturing hub. It's not enough to be a manufacturing hub. We have to become a technology leader. Secondly, we have to create a sustainable regional security architecture. And thirdly, we have to maintain strategic flexibility at the same time that we are deepening our beneficial partnerships with other nations. And that brings me to the end of today's presentation. So I hope this was of value to you. A lot of information in here. And if this brought you some value, please like, subscribe, and share. And so, yeah, that's the end of today's Indian Interest live stream. The first episode in more than 2 years, but this is going to be a weekly feature now. This will continue. And those of you who have questions regarding what we have just discussed, you are welcome to join me in the Ask Abhijit live stream that begins immediately as this live stream ends. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for participating. And I will see you very soon, immediately after this ends, in Ask Abhijit. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.